Hello friends, it's Simone. Today I want to talk about currently inked lists, why we do them, how we do them, why they work or don't work for tracking your fountain pens and inks, and share some ideas on how they could be beneficial for you or how they are not. Let's dive in. So, in the past, I have done various different forms of currently inked lists, and I would like to show you what worked and what didn't work for me, and how I've been trying to gather the data that I document so that I benefit from it later. Now, let's go all the way back to 2021. This is one of the earlier currently inked lists that I made. I just plopped it right into my regular creative journal that I had at the time. I think there might be other currently inked lists prior to this, but I don't have a good way of finding the re-inked my pens, February 12, 2020. Is that really 2020? Must be 2021. Yes. Here is a currently inked winter palette right here. So I don't have a good way of finding these lists in this book. Here, I just noticed that I just found this while I was flipping through this. I not only made a list, but I also wrote about each ink and pen pairing. So this is definitely something that is helpful in the specific moment. Not because I can go back and find it at a later date, but because at that moment, I am actually actively thinking about what I like about this, what I don't like about it, if this is something that I want to use more of, or if it's just okay and not something that I enjoy using. I already owned Lennon Toolbar Oyster in 2021. This is an ink that I just recently rediscovered. So, from hiding my currently inked lists in my creative journal, which is nice, but doesn't really help, I went to writing currently inked lists in a separate notebook. Not just one, but three. I had one list on Tomoe River paper. I had one list on Cosmo Aero Light paper, and I had the same list in an MD notebook. What information did this give me? So in the beginning, I would just write lists and call it done. I started this in 2021, so I made these lists parallel. One in here, one in here. And then I would find that, yes, it is nice to have an overview of what ink is in what pen, but that still does not give me, I know I had this pen inked with this ink, the Franklin Christoph Model 45 with a medium nib. I inked it with Diamine Inkvent Black Ivy, and it totally did not work out for me at all. But there's no note of that. So what did not work? Why did it not work? Did I like the line width of the nib? How did the pen feel in my hand? Any of these markers did not really, I wasn't able to find them. And then So in May 2022, I started to do exactly what I said. I didn't have any data on how this worked. I started tracking more. So I gave plus plus, love the pen, nib, and ink, plus plus, loved all three. I guess all three means loved the pen, the nib, and the ink. And I did this, I'm still doing this in some sort of way for my pens now. I'm just going to flip through this so you can see, and then I stopped doing the plus and minus, and then I started a scale from 0 to 10. Then I ranked the pens. There I wrote more, so I started, I still did it on both sides here. I wrote more about the pen. Then I just documented the 30 inks, 30 days. Then I went back to, no, I did not write anything down here. Here's the ink vent. And then I stopped using this notebook. Same thing here. I did not do any of the evaluation because I thought having one evaluation in one specific notebook would all I needed, which is I feel that that's totally okay. So that was Cosmo Air Light, and then this was MD paper. What did I gain from this? I was able to see one pen and ink pairing on 3 different papers and see if the ink would change the color. I would see if how the ink flowed on the paper. For me, MD paper was always a dry writing experience, and it is consistently so. Same here on the Cosmo Air Light. It always feels very draggy. Some colors of inks are different. Let's see if I can find the Benu. The Benu Ambrosia with Krishna Chennai. Where was that? Interesting here. I think this looks more green on here than it does on here. Most of the pens feel broader when I use them on Cosmo Air Light. So that is something that is always the same. All my pens feel broader on Cosmo Air Light. But that's not what I was going to talk about. So I had a separate notebook where I would track my pen and ink pairings. I would write some snippet on how it felt, and that's that. Now, that I felt like it wasn't enough. And so I started tracking my fountain pens individually. What I mean by that is I have a list of pens. So let's just take this first paper. Every paper is set up the same way. I have the pen, the model, the color, the original nib it came with. That is important, especially if it's an interchangeable nib, like here. When I received it, where I received it from, and the measurements that are important for me. So the grip width, the length, closed, uncapped, posted, the weight, unposted, and the weight with the cap, so posted, and the weight without the cap, so unposted. And then I would put a writing sample of the ink that I have here. If it is a different nib, I would write the nib that is in the pen at the moment of this inking, and then when I inked it and when I uninked it. Now, as I'm thinking about this now, what would be even better was if there was the sentence that I shared here would also appear here. I film YouTube videos, as you can clearly see, and so this was a way for me to share my currently inked list on YouTube. It worked well for that, but for me, as to retrieve the data that I have about this pen, it would probably be better if that same evaluation was also in here. Because of course I can see that maybe this ink is wetter than this, I don't know. Or the shimmer was distributed quite evenly here, but it doesn't give me any information about the writing experience that I had when I used this pen. So probably moving forward, I will write exactly that, add one more line here and write about the specific experience. I did track that prior, but it wasn't a good fit. I had it in a notebook like this one, just a little bit bigger. And what happened here was that if I sold a pen or if the page was full, I would have to flip to someplace else. Now, because I have this on rings, I can easily take out and remove the pages that of no longer active pens that are no longer in my collection. And so it is easy to find all of the pens. These are sorted alphabetically. And that is definitely a benefit of this ring binder for me. Whatever you do is you don't even have to track. That's basically what I wanted to say in the beginning. This is for those people who are so extremely nerdy about all of this stuff, that this data that they gain from making those lists is important, is necessary, or they want to do that. So that's the pen list. During the summer of 2024, I'm filming this at the end of the summer of 2024, I explored all of my ink bottles, and I realized that because ink bottles, in comparison to samples, have a longer lifespan in my collection, it would make sense to do the exact same thing that is here for my ink bottles as well. So I started another binder for the same reason, a binder for the same reason as for the pens, because it's easy to remove an ink bottle that I no longer own. So I made an ink swatch here, and then I am documenting what pen it is in. And then, because I learned from my experience prior to this, I am writing down what I think about the pen and ink pairing. Of course, I'm trying to focus more on the ink side of this, but I also want to know if I like the ink in this specific pen. In this scenario, the date of when I put the ink in the pen is not important to me. It is important to me in the pen list here. So here I have the date when I ink it and when I unink it. Because I feel that this gives me quite some valuable data. Another thing that could be really interesting to track here would also be, did I write this pen dry or did I decide to empty it out? Don't have that here. As I'm filming this, I'm like, yeah, maybe that would be something that would be interesting, like as a column right here, to have a 0 and an E, or I don't know how you would track this, but just an easy symbol to see, was this pen written dry or was this pen emptied out at some point? So as I said earlier, I am definitely going to change up how I'm tracking this in here with more sentence, and I believe I will also put the empty or refilled, maybe would also be an interesting thing. So I had it inked from September 20th to December 24th. Did I re-ink it in between, or what happened? What else? So in 2023, I had the fabulous idea of tracking my fountain pens and inks in a Hobonichi weeks. And so what I did there was, every time I would use this pen and ink in my long form writing journal, I would write down what pen and ink I used and how I felt about this pen and ink pairing at that specific moment. Now you would say, why is this important? Does what I learned from doing this throughout the year is that it can actually change. So if I'm not feeling well on the 2nd of January, maybe my writing experience with this pen will not be as good, and my outlook on this pairing will be influenced by how I'm feeling in general. And then maybe I'm coming back to this pen on the 19th and I feel completely different about that writing experience. So maybe this is excessive. I probably agree with you. Even if I didn't take anything else away from this whole experiment, is that I need to pay attention and use this pen more than just one time to judge how a pen and ink feels to me. And also, I just really loved doing this. But I decided not to continue using this in 2024. And I went to a really big journal here, where I basically wrote a little snippet every time I inked a pen. So I tracked in December, I did the ink vent, so I would do a daily snippet. Then in January, I went to just inking, I don't know how many pens, but the pens that I had inked here, I would come back multiple times and then write down my experience with it. Again, this is something that is nice to have, but it's also really, really hard to, if you don't keep an index of what pen and ink is on what page, this is hard to go back to and find out, oh yeah, Esterbrook SD with the fine flex nib, and Pilot Iroshizuku Tsutsuji, this is how it felt. So I did this for multiple months until May. And then I went back to a 31-day inking schedule where I only wrote a first impressions snippet for each of those pens and ink pairings that I had. That is also something that you can do, but again, it will be hard to find the data. But if you love pens and inks, I mean, it's definitely a way to do it. Now, in the two most recent currently inked videos that I shared, I had these pens already inked for a while. I had an extensive, not so extensive experience with all of those pens. And so I made these lists in order to be able to do basically a final thoughts on all of those. So those pens were inked and I wrote my first impressions about these. But then I came back to film a video and share what is working, how it actually writes, and why I don't feel like this is for me at this point. All this to say that all of this that I just shared, the currently inked list in this ink journal, the inky calendar here, this one here, always gives you a tiny snippet of what was in a pen, but it's not easily located. I just recently watched a video by Chris Sains where she talked about an index with index cards where she lists her pen and then she just dates when she had it inked. This way she can go into her ink journal and then look it up and find the data that way. That is an interesting way of making the information that is in these journals more accessible. I thought about if you're interested in the inks more than maybe the pens, dating the cards when you used it in what pen would also be a good way of tracking. Okay, I used this ink multiple times in various different pens. So you could use systems that are already here. I personally find two ideas really enticing, and I just want to talk about what they are. So I'm just going to use this notebook for those. Let's pretend you are using maybe a Hobonichi Techo or any journal where you mainly use your fountain pens in. You could create a monthly list where you would then start each month with a list. So maybe it is May of 2024. And then on that list, you would write the pens that you are carrying over from last month. So these are your carryover pens. Then you have your newly inked pens that you start out the month with if you ink your pens in a monthly fashion. And then you would add more pens that you ink throughout the month. This works best, in my opinion, if you are inking and changing out pens on a monthly basis. There's a lot of people that do this, maybe because they match their ink colors to the stickers that they use in their journals, if they use, for instance, a kit or something, or because they want to change it by month. However, that is not necessarily important. But let me just finish talking about the monthly thing, and then I'll show you an idea that I have for an ongoing inked list. So what I would track on this is the pen, the nib, and the ink. I would track the date inked. I would track the date it was emptied. Maybe I would track if it was written dry or if I dumped the ink. And then I would also track if I refilled. I don't know if you necessarily need the date. So, and if you do this for every single pen in these different categories, you will get, then in June, you do the same thing. You put all your carryover pens on the top, your newly inked pens here, and then if you add pens you ink throughout the month, you put them here. Do you need to evaluate those pens? I don't know if that is important for you or not. Maybe if you have it in a monthly fashion, that would be something that you would be able to just by looking at it, or maybe during the month before you start your new month. I say May. This is probably month. There we go. Before you, I'm circling my pen thing. Maybe before you're moving to the next month, you can then write about how you feel about each and every pen. I often, when I do long form journaling, if I extremely hate the way a pen feels, I will do that while I'm journaling. I'm writing, this and this happened. I'm so anxious about this. Oh my goodness, this pen is amazing. It feels so great. The ink flow is amazing. And then I will continue writing about whatever is happening in my life. And the same thing if I just cannot with a pen. The way you do this is always up to you and how deep you want to go. Is this necessary? No, you don't need a list at all. You can just ink and unink, write dry, discard inks as you please without any documentation ever. Your fountain pen life will not be influenced by that in any way. This is for the nerds among us. Another way that I personally think tracking would be really helpful to gain data from, or at least, data. That's perfect. So I wouldn't have any date or a title. I mean, you can have any title that you want, but I would write the date. And every time you ink a pen, you continue working on this list. And then you date inked. And then you write the pen, the ink, the nib, the ink. And then you write the date that it is empty. And then you continue with this list all the way. It's a continual list that you do every time that you ink or unink a pen. So if this pen was empty, or if I refill this pen, then maybe, so how would you track refilling the pen? Maybe I would date refilled. because technically it was written dry, right? And then I would continue writing with it. So then you write the next pen that you date inked, pen, nib, ink, date empty. Maybe you would leave space for a one-liner about how you enjoy and don't enjoy the pen. Depending on what other tracking devices that you use, this would be something that you could incorporate in this list. Or not. Maybe you have multiple of these tracking devices. So I am personally thinking about adding one of those lists. I'm not really sure that I want to continue with this specific list right here. So what I've been thinking is I might go ahead and start a list like this in this notebook, just because it makes more sense to me than writing down this list over and over again, or every time I ink a new pen. It's nice to see, but it doesn't really give me enough information to keep going with this right now. And as you can clearly see, you can change up the way that you are documenting, tracking, not tracking, or analyzing your pens and inks as much as you would like. There's no hard and fast rules on what you have to do. So these worked for a while for me, and then I thought of other ideas that I wanted to try. They worked, and sometimes they didn't work. Maybe they gave me a lot of joy, but they didn't help me track. So I'm currently really enjoying these two tracking devices. And of course, these are all just the analog tools. You can also do all of this on a sheet, Excel or Google Sheets. You can do this in Fountain Pen Companion probably. There is no limit to how you track. I just thought I wanted to give you some ideas on what you can and, well, cannot is not a thing, right? The world is your oyster. You do the things that bring you joy and that allow you to nerd out about the things that make you happy. That is the message of this video. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end. I hope to see you again soon. Until then, bye.